Thanks, guys. We're going to talk about big dogs, and I know that is a hot button issue. We don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers on how to save all the big dogs, but we're trying to get there as an industry. And so I'm hoping this session can be really interactive, and we can kind of go through some calculations and different things that we're trying to see if makes sense, but then also brainstorming. Like this can be a group activity where we're getting maybe getting closer to creating some answers for these guys. So big dogs, I was thinking that we could even start with, if somebody wants to be a whiteboard or a writer, we could get some public, like some interaction page. I'm looking at you. Sorry, I happen to know your name right there in the front row. So you guys tell me, why do you think big dogs are so hard to save? So these are dogs that are probably in the 50+ pound range. They are probably in the pit bull type dog range, may or may not have any behavior issues. What are the obstacles that you guys face? Limiting, like human housing? Okay. Okay, anybody else? So in the shelter handling, is that? For adopters, okay. So they're less attractive? Okay, so what should I put up there? In shelter handling is difficult, and strength, okay. What else you got? Okay. Okay, breed discrimination with, you mean just the general public or with housing restrictions? Both, okay. We've got housing, so I guess let's just put up personal bias, breed bias. Okay, somebody way in the back, black shirt. Sorry, 2 black shirts, sorry. Okay, the one closest to me first, and then this, yeah. Okay. Okay. What about you behind her? So it's harder to deal with whatever you get when it's a surprise because they're bigger? So fear of size, surprise, size. Okay, how about you? Mm-hmm. So less attractive? Mm-hmm. Go ahead and go.
Just they do more damage. I mean, when they chew off, when they pee in the house, they're too big.
Yeah. So what is that? It's not liability, but it's damage, I guess, is fine. Okay, let's do one more, and then let's see if we're missing anything in particular. Go ahead.
Like the age, like people would rather get a puppy for more time.
Okay, do you see the same problem with little dogs, though?
Sometime in my previous shelter, yes.
Okay.
Like some of the longest stay animals were the senior small dogs.
Okay. All right, are we missing anything? So we've got kind of 2 categories going on. We've got the people side of it, and then we have the shelter side of it. And so there's different issues. You're trying to save them in the shelter, and there's obstacles in the shelter, and then you're trying to put them out in the world, and there's obstacles in the world. Are we missing anything from those 2 categories? Okay, pet sitter? Pet sitting, maybe? I don't know. Yeah. So inconvenient, maybe? All right, any others that we're missing as a big category? Okay. Housing, would that fit in housing? Okay. Yeah. Oh, great. We have a bigger board for you, Paige.
Got it?
All right, let's do at least one more. Okay, so stress, shelter stress, for sure. That's a big one. Christina?
Like families with small children, they are more hesitant to get a bigger dog. They don't want their kids being passed over. They're thinking that if the bigger dog bites their kid, it's going to be worse than a little dog's bite. This family situation.
Okay, so would that fit in inconvenient or damage? Fear of size. Okay. All right, are we missing anything big?
Transporting, you can transport a lot of smaller dogs or puppies versus how many of a large dog.
To other places? Okay. So size, I guess that's part of size too. Okay, so feel like we got a pretty decent list?
Just the fact that there tend to be more of them in such numbers,
Okay.
because they have a large population.
Quantity? Okay. All right, anything huge we're missing? Otherwise, we should move on. And we're going to have more interaction. Okay, so actual liability of, for behavior? Okay. All right, so let's just keep talking. And I think I wrote down some of these same things. They're difficult. They don't get adopted fast. They take up a ton of space. Fosters and adopters don't typically choose them. They stay too long. They start to lose their minds in the shelter. They're hard for staff to handle, and then the other things that we came up with. So what we try to do, part of the way that we've been able to solve problems is by not thinking about problems in terms of them being out of our control, but trying to think of things in terms of being in our control. And so I started a list of this. So most shelters are built the same size, no matter their life-saving percent, and that's on us. That's because when we're getting shelters built, when we're talking to architects, they have a model, they have a formula they use for estimating the number of kennels they need, and I guarantee it does not satisfy what our big dog population needs. And part of that is based on the length of stay is false. Nobody in America knows what the actual length of stay for all the large breed dogs is supposed to be. We don't know what it could be. We don't know what our optimal length of stay is, and we don't even know what our worst length of stay is because we kill our problems. And so it's artificially gone. The length of stay is artificially shorter than it probably would be in the worst case scenario, which makes it really difficult to plan for housing them. And the foster programs, our foster programs tend to be, the fosters come and tell us what they want, and we give them something that they would like. And that, we just talked about it, that's not these dogs. So they don't typically fit easily in the foster homes, but we are also not dedicating our resources to try to get them into those foster homes. And so we need to really think about what resources we need to do that adequately. A lot of it's support. All the things on that list don't go away just because the dog goes to a foster home. We have to build that into our programming to be able to support people through the dog chewing up their house, knocking over their kid, whatever it is that happens in the home. If we can't respond to them quickly and support them, then the dog's going to come back. We already know that. That happens a lot. And then the adoption programming also is not meeting their needs. We talked about this in the opening session. If these dogs are terrible about putting a great first impression forward, and so they don't get adopted. We rely on the do-it-yourself adoption method where people go walk through the kennels and they find somebody they like, and then they come and ask you about that dog, and then they fill out paperwork, and then they take the dog home. These dogs don't fit in that. They need concierge service or something better than what we're currently offering because they're not selling themselves. And their length of stay is a problem, and it is even more of a problem when we're not building adequate resources to serve their needs while they're with us. And so that leads down the path of them losing their minds and not coping well with being in the shelter. And then last but not least, we have terrible data around these dogs. Everything in our databases is listed by breed or by, you can have weight in there. I can't run a report in anybody's system that easily tells me anything about these dogs as a whole. And we need to figure out how we can get the data out of the systems that tells us what's happening with them so that we can start making metrics that are going to make it better for these dogs and start getting towards a better goal. I don't have a good answer for that, but these are all things that are kind of people problems, and we need to start solving for them. So there's adequate capacity in my mind is three things. One is space capacity, that's foster homes, that's cages. Second is people capacity, caring for them, providing enrichment, helping them become better citizens so that they are more adoptable. And then the third is process capacity, the adoption processes, the foster support processes, adoption follow-up processes. All those things are needed for this, this group of animals that a lot of our other groups of animals don't need. So going back to the shelter floor plan, the shelter size, the kennels are all built the same, it seems like, across the country. And I know we've got some Austin Animal Center people here. I doubt that they realized when they moved out of the terrible town lake that the city shelter was going to have the same setup of the exact same, this many kennels all together. You have to pull a dog out and walk it right by all the other dogs. It's not made for them to be here this long, so it is like jail. All of our shelters are typically built like jail, where it's cell after cell after cell, and we're constantly amazed that it doesn't work out. But we need a better system. I don't have all the answers. I'm just sharing all the problems with you, but hope you don't mind. So what's wrong with that? The higher our live release rate, the more we need large dog kennels. You don't need them. We have another good example in Austin. When the no-kill movement started in 2008, the actual architecture plans for the new city shelter were started in 2007. And they never changed between 2007 and 2011. And so the shelter that was built in 2011 was built for big dogs to stay 3 days and then be killed. And so there were a lot of group housing for little dogs and puppies, and then the single housing that was made to accommodate the number of big dogs that were coming in, but only staying a few days. And so it's totally inappropriate for the actual needs of a no-kill city. Single housed dogs, we don't have a lot of dogs that can be group housed. Our kennels are too small for that too. They stay longer, which means that the turnover rate is very low per kennel, which means you need more kennels. If you're going to save the same number of dogs, but they don't leave, then you actually need more kennels. And they need separation. That whole jail cell where one dog starts acting up and then the whole row starts acting up is a real thing, and the kennel designs don't solve for that. So it doesn't work. So what we've been trying to figure out, just as a really baseline, how do we at least get to a place where we're not killing all the dogs? And Austin has figured that out. We got at least that part done. And the calculation that we've come up with is that you need one kennel for 25 dogs for 25 of your total dogs taken in, including puppies and small breed dogs. So if you take in 10,000 dogs a year, divide that by 25, that's how many kennels you need to save all the big dogs, and have them have a probably pretty long length of stay for the really big ones and the more difficult dogs, and then a low length of stay for puppies and small breed dogs. So we're going to do some math right now. You guys get to do your math and figure out what is your intake for all your dogs, and then figure out what it would be for 25 dogs. That's if they're singly housed. I didn't say that right. The math is here, and I'll show you a calculation so you can see it a little more clearly. But it assumes that there's a pretty fast, and I don't know why this isn't working. Oh yeah, okay. So it assumes that there is a pretty low length of stay. You know, there's other things involved. It's not just building kennels and then leaving them forever. But what we've found is with adequate programming overall, we're able to get away with one kennel for 25 dogs that are singly housed, or one kennel for 40 dogs if you typically double house your big dogs that don't know each other. So what questions do you have about that? Let's try it. So you've got a certain number of dogs, all dogs, your total dog intake divided by either 25 or 40. How many dog kennels do you need to just stop killing? Has nothing to do with programming or anything else. Anybody want to throw out some numbers compared to what you've got? And tell me what questions you are. I'm getting some blank stares, so I feel like maybe it's not very clear. You need 90 and you have 16? That's a problem. I told you I'm not solving everything. I'm just telling you what our problems are. Who else has got a number? Go ahead. Wow. Okay. Wow. And that's single house dogs. You don't double up. Okay. Okay. And what's your save rate for dogs? Okay, makes sense. Our save rate didn't go way up for dogs until the city moved to their new shelter and APA got their old kennels, and we were able to essentially double our big dog capacity in the city. That happened. That's how we knew it was based on kennels. There was something to the math on kennels. Okay, who else has got an example? Has anybody got more kennels than they need? Wow, that's amazing. Are you at really high save rates? What? So tell us what you've got.
Shelter in my area takes 3,000 dogs in. Would need 120 kennels per the calculation. They have about 180 to 200.
And what's the save rate?
For dogs,
dogs?
it's about 70%.
Wow. Okay, so you're probably missing one of the other ingredients. Either, so you have to have the other flip side of this is foster capacity. Is
They
there
don't
a
have
foster
a foster.
program?
They do not use
Okay.
a foster program. They're very regressive shelter.
Okay, so that's where you
That's the
focus
problem.
some energy. So foster programs are essential, even if it's the foster program that's not geared towards the big dogs. The foster programs keep your easy dogs out of your kennels, which gives the big dogs the kennels longer. So getting those little dogs out, everybody gets out except for the dogs that really need to be in the kennels. And that is a part of the equation, if you will, but it's not part of this actual math problem. Okay, so second problem is lack of foster homes. We already know why people don't pick them. It's the same. If you think about fosters and adopters, they're exactly the same. They're looking for somebody to share their home with them. And so whatever problems you have on the adoption side, you're going to have the exact same problem on the foster side. The good news is if you solve one, then you solve both. So they don't sell themselves very well. People aren't wanting to have to manage them. They want dogs that'll just slip into their homes and be perfectly aligned with their whole brood of kids, cats, dogs, everything else. Anything, I think we covered actually all the other anything else's. So foster goal, more math. I love math, and I know that I'm probably the only one. We're also finding that in foster at a time to keep your cage capacity open enough to have your actual physical brick and mortar kennels save lives, you need 3% of your dogs. So your total dog intake, going back to that 3,000 dogs taken in a year, and at a single moment you would need 3% of those total dog intakes to be in foster at a time. So you want to try it? So maybe we use I'm trying to think of an example. Actually, I've got one on the next slide. So this is the math equation for a shelter that takes in 10,000 dogs a year. And you would need 300, just dogs, just regular old dogs, doesn't matter if they're big or small, just dogs in foster at a time to be able to use that kennel calculation effectively, and the foster kennels make up for the rest of the dogs that you need to be able to house. So you can see this does kind of double what you would need. If you had no foster program, then you would need at least double the number of kennels, at least double. And then what we've also found recently, really interesting when we're looking at big dogs in foster in pretty well, nobody's got it figured out, nobody's doing it perfectly, but pretty well performing cities, Austin, Pima, between Austin and Austin Animal Center, we're finding that 36% of our foster dogs are large breed dogs. And so hopefully that gives everybody a goal, gives you something to work towards. If you have an open intake shelter and you have all the types of dogs that are coming in, if you can try to get a certain number of those foster dogs to be large breed dogs and start trying to work towards that goal, then you're going to keep building that capacity for these big guys that have such a harder time. And the best thing about them is often once they are in a foster home, they stay or they get adopted by that foster home. Okay, does that make sense? I know I'm really pushing math boundaries here, which is why there's a picture of somebody who hates math up there. Okay, so we kind of went through, is there anybody want to share, or is anybody doing more fosters than the calculation says? Is anybody way off, like way low? Did anybody want to share where they are and why they think they're there?
Hi, I'm from Dallas. Our foster program is actually pretty new this year, so we don't have very many fosters. In 2016, we intaked almost 23,000 dogs. So we would need like 600 fosters according to that calculation. So.
And what do you have right now?
Like I said, it's kind of newer this year, so we really rely on rescue.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have very few fosters through the shelter program right now. Yeah.
And rescue is a great opportunity. Especially local rescue works really well because they just pick up the animals and leave. Transport, you have to almost think of as fosters because they need to stay for 2 weeks at least, usually, before they have to go be transported out. Anybody else want to share where they are? Is this super daunting, or do you feel like this is helpful to have some goals? Yeah, it's a little scary. Okay. So lack of adopters, we already know, same problems. One thing we've found by talking to our fosters directly about why they foster big dogs is that they know they don't have to keep them forever. And so we've had more luck, a little bit more luck getting people to foster the big dogs than especially dogs that don't like other dogs or have severe stranger danger. We have a little bit more luck getting them into foster than we do into an adopter home. So I think that's interesting, and maybe it's something for us as an industry to keep working on this. Letting people help temporarily, even if they don't want to help for the next 15 years with that problem. And so calculation, I didn't tell you, I should have told you this was actually a math class, but it's not. So Austin and Dallas, this is also really interesting, is about adoptions, is that looking at our intake numbers and trying to figure out if you're looking at that pie chart that we looked at the very beginning of the day, and you want to do 60% of your animals, it's assuming that your intake and your outcomes are going to be the same every year, so there's some flaws in that. But if you have a certain number of dogs coming in, it's interesting across Texas at least that we have 2 very big municipalities. This is Austin Animal Center data and Dallas data, that 44%, exactly the same in both cities, 44% of the dogs that come in the door are large breed adult dogs. So there's some, I don't know what's going on, but somehow they're all reading the same manual and we're getting some of the same numbers across municipalities. And so that helps a little bit when you're trying to figure out how many you're really dealing with. We think of them as, I used to think that the majority of the dogs that were coming into Austin were large breed dogs. And it's not the majority, it's the minority. The other thing I thought is that they were mostly pit bull type dogs, adult dogs. And that's an illusion. It's an illusion because they stay in our kennels longer and they fill up more kennels, but your total, it's because those easier ones are turning over faster. And so those cages are just flipping really quickly and you get all this backlog or bottleneck of big dogs. And so it looks like that's all you're getting in the door, but in reality, every city actually takes in more other types of dogs than large breed adult dogs. So this is, let's see, so if we're looking at the intake and looking at the number of dogs that are coming in that are large breed, you can get a total of income of intake for large dogs, and that should equal the number that needs to get out. Of course, there's going to be some, I have the calculation on the side over there, that there's going to be some that are euthanized for behavior. There's going to be some that are euthanized for medical. There's going to be some transferred out. There's going to be some returned to owner. These are guesses. We don't actually know the breakdown of large breed dogs that go in those categories, but we can assume that transfer is pretty small in comparison to other types of dogs. But you can sort of get to a number of dogs that needs to be adopted every month. If you know how many need to leave every year, then you can start to break down how many you need every month, and then you can start making some goals around how are you going to get that many adopted every week, and keep tweaking the process. I think that's something we've been incredibly guilty of that. We get used to the processes that we're doing, and we never take a second to see if it's being effective. Are we getting the right dogs out? Are we getting the right number out? And we all need to get better at that. Monthly meetings, weekly meetings would be even better, where you're talking through, okay, what worked, what do we need to change, and how do we get these numbers out there, because they're pretty big. And so the 10,000 dog intake is what Austin Animal Center has, and we take a percentage of those dogs, and so we kind of compare we marry our results with their results of their dogs to be able to get kind of a goal set. So you guys probably are feeling like that's not possible. Is anybody feeling like that's possible? Is this making it somewhat possible, feeling like it might be? Okay, well, there's a couple people. I like to think about it in terms of math because it makes it less daunting for me. If I can figure out what the number is, then I can work and work and work and work and try to get to that number. If it feels like it's just big dogs and behavior and length of stay, all these things just feel really nebulous, and once you start getting some detail around them, it actually makes it goal-oriented. So some traditional strategies that we have for trying to get them adopted is do-it-yourself adoptions. We already talked about that. These dogs fail in a big way at that. The retail shelter model, we're probably all guilty of this too, where we're purposely not stacking too many kennels full of big dogs, and especially pit bull type dogs. And the problem of that is that if you're not using your kennel space for the dogs that need it, then that means the dogs that need it are probably dying. And if you're able to save all the easies, then let the easies be saved and use your kennels for the animals that need it. I'm not saying that very well, but when we think of our kennels as a store for people to come look and get a variety and have a good inventory, we are not serving the animals that need us the most. Because in the real world, probably all of our shelters should just be full of pit bull type dogs, because those are the ones that are not making it out of the shelter. And so all the dogs that are in the shelter that are not those probably don't need to be in the shelter. They've got an outcome that is better than that. And I challenge us to start thinking about that, because it is hard. It requires us to explain what's going on when somebody walks in the door. Hey, you're going to see a lot of really big dogs here, and a lot of them are pit bull type dogs, but the truth is, in the city of Austin, those are the only dogs that are dying, and they're the only ones that really need your help. And that's a message that adopters actually aren't afraid of, and it helps them see that the need in Austin is around those dogs. If they walk into a shelter with the perfect inventory, they think that the little poodle is in the same danger as a pit bull type dog, and everybody here should know that that's not the case. That poodle has a million outcomes better. Kennel cards is another way we put bios. So some progressive strategies is youth list posting. I mentioned it this morning. It's really uncomfortable for most cities, but it is incredibly helpful. And in San Antonio, we see a lot of large breed dogs leave that I would have never guessed would leave, because they are being marketed and it's their last day, it's their last couple hours, and people do want to help them, and they step up and they help them. Another way is excellent marketing. If you can focus all your marketing effort on the hard ones and maybe not so much on the easy ones. The easy ones fall in the do-it-yourself marketing. They don't need a lot of your help. The big ones really do need your help. And then some other strategies, this is part of what we'll talk about for a few more slides, is tiring them out. Dogs playing for life. I think, did I see somebody here from, yeah, there she is. That is got to be a critical strategy for housing these dogs. It's part of that enrichment. They can't live there and be on display for week after week after week and not lose their minds. And the Dogs Playing for Life model really helps them at least get out of their kennels and at least play and socialize and learn something from another dog, and hopefully get adopted. Training them, it's hard. All of this takes a lot more work than just putting them up for adoption and hoping somebody chooses them. But if we're going to save this group of dogs, we really need to think about all the layers that are involved. When I'm doing tours at our shelter, I talk about the other niche programs that we have, and they're mostly medical. And all of the medical programs need one fix, and then they're ready to go. These dogs need these layers of support that just keep going up. We don't even know where the top of the layers are because we haven't solved it for them yet. We've solved saving their lives. We have not solved saving their quality of life and getting them out of our shelter fast. So think of these as layers, and it takes a tremendous amount of resources. Our clinic is our #1 expense, and then our dog program is just slightly below that because it is incredibly expensive to keep adding these layers. Matchmaker program, I'll talk about that. Virtual fosters, we'll touch on that in a second. And then leveraging volunteers. This is a people power problem, and when you have 3 staff that are responsible for taking care of 200 dogs, they're not going to be able to do any of this. So you've got to leverage more people. You've got to invite people in to help solve the problem for you. Youth list sharing, I just briefly talked about that. The excellent marketing is making sure you actually do have good photos, you have the happy, positive bio. We try really hard to have our bio that is facing the public to be all positive. And we think about it as a dating, like your first date. You don't tell everything that's wrong with you on your first date. Nobody does. I don't know anybody that does. If they do, they're probably still single. And that is not the way to go for dogs either. So you want to tell people all the good things about the dog, and then if there's a connection, then start explaining how this dog is going to live in the home and what is required for them to be a good partner in the home. Great videos. You know all this, getting them up on the website. They need more. They need a wider net than everybody else. Tiring them out, dogs playing for life. I think they're going to touch on that in one of the sessions. I'm not 100% sure, but we have videos of it. Dogs Playing for Life obviously has a lot of materials that they can share. And when I first started as a veterinarian, my boss was telling our clients a tired dog is a good dog. When anybody had a behavior problem, he said a tired dog is a good dog. Just go walk it around the block until it's so tired that it falls asleep. And it's kind of silly, but it's really kind of true. They are, when they're tired, they are much better behaved. Training them. So we have volunteer programs, and like I said, we're not doing this perfectly, but we have a structured program. Anybody that visits our shelter can see that we've created structure around our dogs so that they're easily identifiable to our volunteers. When we first moved into Town Lake and we got all these extra kennels and we filled up on a bunch of dogs, we were so excited to go save all these dogs off the youth list. And then we were like, oh crap, what do we do with all these big dogs? Because it was a lot harder than what we were doing before. And we had people coming in and getting a leash and taking a dog out, and we had no control over any of it, and it was pretty terrifying. And so what Mike Caviani, when we first hired him, did, he came and created this collar color system for our dogs. So each dog, depending on what behavioral needs they have or what it's actually handling needs they have, we've assigned one of a few colors. So their pink and green is super easy. That's the kind of dog that anybody can get out of a kennel and take it on a walk. We have our orange dogs that are scared. They're the dogs that are, if somebody drops the leash, they might just take off and run. And so somebody needs a little bit of extra handling skill to not do that to them and not cower over them and not grab them too fast and scare them and get a bite. We have our blue dogs that are jumpy and mouthy. So they're the ones that are a little bit harder to handle, and you need to be a little stronger, and you need to know how to get them in and out of a kennel without them knocking you over. And then we have our yellow dogs, which is a higher level version of that scared dog. These are the dogs that are definitely going to bite you if you corner them. And so we needed a little bit more handling for those dogs, the handling skill. And then we have silver dogs that are the amped up, jumpy and mouthy. They're the ones that actually probably will bite you if you're handling them wrong. They get too excited, and then they can have, silver kind of encompasses a few different categories of behavior. And so what he did that I thought was so brilliant is he set up training programs for each of those levels. So it only takes a couple days to be trained to take out the pink and greens. Volunteers come in, they learn how to handle them in our kennel, which is a terrible kennel, and getting the dogs out is problematic no matter how easy they are because their neighbors are barking at them and it's just a big mess. And then there's another layer, it's another few days to be able to handle the orange dogs, and it goes like that. And so I think it's a really smart way to handle them, and then we have these big whiteboards, and they're all layered by their colors, so a volunteer can quickly walk in and see what color they're allowed to handle and what they've been trained up to, and then they can help walk dogs. And along with that, we have committed to twice-a-day outings for every single dog, and we're only able to accomplish that because of the volunteer force that we have that is trained through the system, and it's an organized chaos that happens twice a day, which is wonderful. The thing that we're finding is that without our volunteer coordinator has been responsible for all the volunteers in APA, which is ridiculous. We have 1,600 active volunteers that have logged hours in the last 3 months. There's no way one person can be personally responsible for all of those people. And so what we're trying to infuse throughout our org chart, but specifically in behavior, is that point person at every collar color, or we're actually talking about maybe breaking the dogs up by length of stay and having a staff person whose job it is to recruit, train, and manage volunteers. So we have eight behavior staff. So let's use some of those behavior staff to get to leverage the people that can help us the most, because over the years we're seeing those volunteer numbers dip. Does anybody else share those problems with volunteers kind of staying, and you put all this into them and then they become these amazing handlers and then they're gone? And so it requires this pipeline of people coming in and being trained, and you don't get that by one volunteer coordinator over 1,600 volunteers. It's not going to happen. And then creating standard training plans, letting people know how they can help, what is the dog's plan, so that people can be a part of the solution. We also have a Canine Good Citizen program, which is an AKC program. We offer an apprenticeship on that, so people can, if you're interested in learning a lot more about that, you can come to an apprenticeship. And that has been wonderful because we have about 45 volunteers that train dogs. They have specific dogs that they train every week, and to get them to be CGC certificate ready. And so it's something that volunteers can really latch onto because it's a very specific start and end, and you have a goal while you're doing it to get them to a place where they can pass this test. So it's been very successful. The matchmakers, their job is to capture the incoming right homes. So we've got we didn't know, this is the lack of data, we didn't know if we had enough people entering the shelter that were interested in large breed dogs or interested in pit bull type dogs, or if we had enough people entering the shelter and they just weren't taking one of our dogs home. And those are two really different solutions. If there's not enough people interested showing up, or you have people showing up and leaving, escaping with no dog, then we had to figure it out. So we created this, if you look, when you're at our shelter, if you see this iPad that's right at the door, and every single visitor has to enter what they're looking at. And so they have to enter if it's an adult dog, if it's a large breed dog, if it's a small dog, if it's a puppy. And it's super simple. We only ask a couple questions. We're going to try to make it a little beefier to get more data. But we found that that 75% of people say that they are interested in a large breed dog. 75% of the people walking in our door. On a Saturday, it's 200 people walking in our door. So why do we still have all these dogs? There's some massive disconnect between the number of people walking in and the number of people actually connecting and leaving with the dog. So that's the job of the matchmakers. That's why we put this program in place. We got a grant as a pilot program. A lot of grantors like pilot programs, especially if they can see at the end of it that you are able to see a tangible difference between the number of dogs adopted and before and the number of dogs adopted after. So I would recommend putting that in if you suffer from not getting these dogs out very fast. Their job is to find people that have entered the property that might be that we call them the needle in the haystack. If they're one of those needle in the haystack families that has no dogs, no kids, and is interested in a large breed dog, then we want to latch onto them and give them the best customer service in the entire world. So hopefully they'll take one of our dogs home. So matchmakers are trying to prevent them from seeing the kennel front behavior. They're trying to take a dog to a pen and let the first meeting happen there. They're trying to hear what that adopter wants and then think of one of the 207 dogs that we have on property that might match that, and then try to get them to make that connection. The number one reason people adopt is because they had a connection to the dog, or they think the dog had a connection to them. And there was a study, this is a little, not really off topic, but there's a woman in Lubbock who does some research with Texas Tech, and she has done a study on, it's a really simple study, I think Maddie's fund funded it, where if the dog engages in any kind of play with the adopter or sits close to the person, then they're they're like 10 times more likely to take that dog home. If the dog ignores them in the pen or doesn't touch them, won't be touched by them, then they're probably not taking that dog home. And so what she recommends doing is testing your dogs to see if they will engage with a ball or a fluffy toy, or if if they don't like a toy at all, don't put a toy in the kennel with them, because if the dog doesn't engage with the toy with the person, then that's a turn off. But if there is no toy, then they might actually still touch the person. So just some tips. I think that's really cool research that she's been trying to get done to help these dogs get adopted. And then positively talking to them, talking about the dog and what they would look like in the home. So it's like, okay, we have dogs that are probably going to bite a stranger if they enter your home. We want to talk about, okay, when you have this dog is uncomfortable with new people, so you want to make sure that they're put away. This is what it looks like. If you have friends over, just make sure they're comfy in their little room. You know, talking about it in a friendly way that doesn't feel overwhelming and doesn't feel scary. And one big piece of it that we've heard from adopters is that they're more likely to adopt if they feel like the matchmaker understands what they're looking for and cares at all what they're looking for. And I think we tend to get in the transactional mode of like, well, what are you looking for? Can I get that dog out? And if we're really hearing them and hearing what they want out of a dog, and then we can put the kind of dog that they're looking for, it doesn't matter what it looks like. It typically doesn't matter what it looks like as long as it fits what they're looking for in the personality traits. And then, of course, that we never send a dog home without giving them full disclosure, any bite history, anything that we're concerned about on the behavior end, they must sign that they have been counseled on that, so that they're not going to go and have a repeat problem in their home, hopefully. Virtual fosters, this is a program that we're still working out the kinks on. But what we found is that fosters do a really good job getting their dogs adopted, but dogs at the shelter don't have that same benefit. And we think it's because when somebody reaches out to look at a dog on the website, they get automatically routed to the foster. The foster is the first line of communication. The foster's telling them all the awesome things about this dog, and they love this dog. It's in their heart. They're telling them about what it's like to live with this dog. And on the flip side, in the shelter, somebody sees one of our dogs on the website and then inquires about it, they're told to go to the shelter. And then the experience at the shelter we already know is not good. So pretty much losing them when we could have had them. So the virtual foster, now we route all of our inquiries about any dog on the website to the virtual foster, and they act just like the foster. So virtual foster is somebody that is handling this dog all the time. They're their best buddy. They love them. They wish they could take them home, but they can't because they have other dogs or whatever. And so they're happy to advocate for that dog. And their job is to keep the marketing fresh. Their job is to work on a training plan with the behavior team. Their job is to be the liaison for the medical clinic. With all these long stay dogs, you can imagine the chaos of having 10 people that care about every single dog, and every time that dog has diarrhea, 10 people go to the clinic and tell them that they need to go do something about that diarrhea in that dog. And it turned into this massive mess. And so virtual fosters actually help solve that. They're the only ones allowed to communicate to the clinic about that dog. They're the only ones allowed to communicate with behavior about that dog. And so it helps streamline some of the work, so it's a little bit more manageable. And the other nice thing is that it's a pro and a con, because it's hard to control how volunteers talk to everybody. But the fosters, at least, when we surveyed them about how the virtual foster program was going, most of them said it was a very positive experience. Having a lifeline, this dog just ate all my stuff, what do I do? And so somebody who loves that dog and knows that dog probably has taken it home on sleepovers and done different things with it. They know what to say. If they're just calling us, we don't know what to say. I mean, we know what to say in general, but we don't know that dog well enough to be the liaison. So having that lifeline is really great. Bad data, we already talked about not being able to measure the length of stay. Nobody knows what length of stay should be. There's nobody in the country that knows what it should be. And that's terrible. It's just a symptom of us having euthanasia at our disposal. And it's also really hard to pull data out to get days in shelter. A lot of the softwares won't distinguish between days in shelter and days in foster. Some of them, it's really hard to tell if they have a sleepover. It's hard to calculate that in. We're constantly trying to figure out which dog hasn't left the shelter. And we'll say, okay, it looks like this one hasn't. And then, oh, no, that dog went out on a sleepover or was adopted for a day and came back, but the paperwork didn't get done. You know, there's all these nuances when the dog is more of a long-term resident that we can't get out of our databases because the databases aren't made for that. They're made for short-term residency. Okay, so what is the length of stay? Does anybody feel like they know what length of stay should be for a large breed dog? There's like 3 categories. There's regular large breed dog, just any old dog as a group. And then there's pit bull type dogs. And then there's any dog with a behavior problem. And they can kind of cross over across each other's categories, but I don't feel like we know what we should be shooting for. Does anybody feel like they do?
Well, I don't have big numbers. I'm a small, very small German Shepherd, breed specific. And typically when I get a rescue, I'm going to keep it for probably 6 months
Yeah.
before I can find a home. And in that time, I do the training, work with them, and we go to meet and greets and, you know, do the adoption applications. And when you adopt from me, I'm going to, like, get to know you, and it's going to be we have kind of a lengthy process. It's going to take about 2 months, maybe quite, to adopt, because we want you, German Shepherds, we want to make sure that you're equipped.
Yeah,
So
no doubt.
we do have a lengthy stay, so I don't have big numbers because I can't.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. Anybody else in a shelter setting have any kind of, like, where no dogs are dying and have a length of stay that they think is shareable? Okay, you don't have, okay, no, that's okay, that's okay. All right, I mean, I think it's a real problem. If we can't measure it, we don't know how to fix it. We know some dogs stay too long, but it's really difficult to set goals when you don't have all the data. Were you gonna say something?
Any large dog that stayed over 30 days ended up staying over a year.
Wow.
So over 90% of dogs that stayed more than 30 days were there over a year.
Yeah.
So their target for them is that they're out in 30 days,
Trying to
or
get
they
them out
know
fast.
that we're looking at over 12-month commitment.
I think that there's maybe something to that. She said that if a dog stayed 30 days, then it stayed a year. And so there was something that was happening at that 30-day mark that was pushing them into super long stay. We're working with some researchers to create a hazard score so that maybe at intake we can determine how hard we need to work during those first 30 days. I don't know if it'll work at all, but it would be great if we as a collective could get more information together about these dogs and figure out what really is going on. The answer is not good. We already know that it's going to be a long time. And we know, I think we're at a pivotal point where we're beat up about warehousing and keeping dogs too long. But until we figure out how to get them out alive, I don't know how we don't go through this ugly puberty phase of, trying to get them out alive. And so, but the faster, if there's a way for everybody to share the same information about what's working and not working and different things, then I think we can maybe get there faster. But we do know we need to set goals to just be better and decrease the amount of time each dog stays. So I think like your example of just trying to prevent from hitting that 30-day mark, I think that's a really smart way to go. So one way you can decrease your overall length of stay, we already know, is decreasing the easier dog's length of stay. That's all the things we've talked about: immediate make ready, sending them to foster, getting them out of your hair, sending them on transport. We don't want them. We want our kennels to be for the harder dogs. Decreasing length of stay for the harder dogs. Is anybody, I think this is another interaction question, what things are working? And let's focus on the hardest of the hard. What's working for your behavior dogs that don't like other dogs? Okay, so foster home as a transition stage, yeah. Totally agree.
Oh,
Training helps. Okay. Back there?
well, she's got somebody back there now.
Yeah, you. Sorry, I can't see you with the light, but yes.
Okay, so we have a dog that's been staying at the shelter for over 2 years. It's crazy. We recently started ramping up the marketing. We now have a dog trainer that is willing to take that dog into his house, train it, make videos of it for 2 weeks at least to help us get it out. So he's a giant 60-plus pound pit bull looking dog. So marketing on that and definitely helpful. Definitely help him.
So you got a trainer to take him. Was that, did the trainer come to you or did you find the trainer? Okay, great. So marketing helped. Great. Anything else?
So, do I need this thing? At our place, we've decided, dogs are adopted out within the first 30 or 40 seconds. The adopters come in and they realize, I don't want this dog. Because if you can't put a leash on it and walk it from the kennel to the outside so they can play with it, they've already made up their mind. So like she was saying, training is absolutely the biggest part. But if you got dogs that are like, we just got in a whole bunch of dogs that were trapped, they've been living wild, and then you can't touch them. And it takes that much longer to touch them. And then you got gator rollers. When you put the leash on them, they start freaking out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good term. Huh?
There are training plans for those dogs, and I'm sort of looking at the Dogs Playing for Life person back there, just not to
Which
put you
we
on the
love
spot.
them.
But do you guys have anything in writing for those dogs, or anything you share?
The premise of what we do is that players must come first. And so we are trying to give those dogs adequate enrichment. I think with length of stay, too, we see rising length of stays in different shelters. It's a different emergency based on what they're getting. It's not just how long they're there, but what they're getting in that time.
Yeah.
So that's essential for us. As far as the training plans, that's kind of our second level, which we call fancy footwork, which is getting the dogs to work well on leash because, yeah, it's damn impressive. So adopters are much more likely to take a dog out the door if they can walk with it instead of being dragged by it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the second level of curriculum we have, and then we go work up to reactive dogs too. So it's kind of the steps that we go through with shelters. So if you're trying to work with a reactive dog but haven't given it the enrichment, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah.
You kind of have to level up.
Totally. Anything else help get these dogs, the dogs that don't like dogs, that it maybe look like pit bulls, that are not, that have left, that you've had positive experiences with? So far we've had aggressive marketing, training, what else? Foster. Okay. Anything else that's new? Let's do like 2 more. So trying to not make them be pit bulls? Yeah. Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And breed labeling. I think we've been offered a lot of DNA tests to test for companies, and we don't do it because we don't want to know for sure. We don't want it in whatever we get back. We have to put in the record. It would be unethical not to. So we don't do that because it could backfire. But I think if you don't have a lot of this type of dog, then maybe it wouldn't be that big of a risk. But I would just have a little word of caution about doing that because it might turn into that absolutely cannot go into the housing that won't allow a pit bull type dog, even if it looks like a lap. All right, one more pink shirt. Yeah.
Until the prison closed, we had a prison pause program where we had our, in cooperation with our local kennel club, they went out and taught CGC to the prisoners. And the prisoners were CGC now trainers.
Wow, that's great.
And the dogs would go live in the prisons. And these were the difficult, they're not going to get adopted dogs.
Yeah,
And they would
that's
spend
fantastic.
8 to 12 weeks out there, and almost all of them got adopted.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's one that should be on the radar, the prison programs, because it does get the dogs out of the kennels. They are automatically separated from other dogs, and getting that one-on-one care, which is really fantastic. Okay, so we spent a lot of time this morning talking about measurable activities, and so I want to try to bring this back towards trying to develop a working plan that you can create some metrics around each of those layers so you can see how well you're doing. And we're, like I said, we're guilty of everything with these dogs. We're really good at the one-hit wonders, trying to get treatment done and get them out the door, but these more chronic things are much harder to handle. And so it's really important that you have your finger on the pulse. So measuring of activities, you want to try to develop a sign-in mechanism. You want to know who is being helped and who's not being helped, and are they getting adequate help? If we have 200 people on a Saturday, we know we have 4 matchmakers. We load them all up on Saturday. That's the most we can afford. But they still, if it takes an hour or 2 hours to help a customer, they're not seeing all those 200 people. So how do we, that helps us determine how many volunteers we need on the matchmaking team to be able to hit all those 200 people and do a good job. So you need a sign-in, you need a matchmaker log. We have an end-of-day report the matchmakers send to all the other dog teams and just say, these are the people we helped, these are the dogs that were shown, these are the adoptions that happened, and it helps us keep track of how well we're doing. And cameras too, it sounds really silly, but one thing that we have security cameras. Using your security cameras to see, are people stopping in front of certain kennels and then never getting help? You can kind of spot check to see how things are going out in the kennel world without having to sit there and watch everything that they're doing, that people are doing. And then how many dogs don't have bios? Most softwares, you can run a report and it'll tell you how many don't have any kind of bio or any kind of photo or any kind of video. And if you can set metrics that the dog enters your program and within X number of days, there's definitely a bio and a photo. And then within X number of days, there's definitely a video. Those things can help keep everybody on track and it helps you put resources towards it. We're having a hard time keeping up, honestly, and we have an all-volunteer dog marketing team. So we're heavily considering moving some of our kennel staff to a marketing position just to get these done in a timely manner. Because like you said, every day matters. If you've got a 30-day timeline that you're really shooting for to get them out, if it takes you 2 weeks to get any marketing done, you've just blown it by accident. And then looking at maybe trying to create some priority levels. We've talked internally about creating an elite list of dogs, and these elite is sort of the opposite of what would normal people think of as elite. So these are going to be our hardest dogs, and having the virtual foster and the matchmaker and the behavior team and the clinic all meet about this smaller group of elite dogs, and there's a new plan every week for them. How are we going to get them out? And so it's like this hyper-focused task force that's really delving into what they need to get out of here alive. And this is another one we have a really hard time with. We don't have an answer for this, but our software doesn't allow volunteers to look in it. And so we put all of our behavior notes and our medical notes in our software, but the volunteers can't access it. And so that's a big problem for a couple of reasons. You have volunteers handling dogs that they don't have the full behavior history on, which could be a liability issue, but also they can't advocate for that dog effectively because what they tell somebody is only what they see. And typically it's not the whole picture that an adopter needs to know about. So we're trying to figure that. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. We need a software that everybody can see into clearly without having to have all these password restrictions. If we've got 300 volunteers on in our dog program, I don't know how to make that accessible to 300 extra people on top of all of our staff. And then checking to make sure that all the dogs actually do have a virtual foster. So think about what you can control. We started this with it's us, not them. And it's maybe a little bit them, but it's mostly us. We're the ones that actually can solve this for them. They can't solve it for themselves. So we need to look at the number of cages. We need to have a key performance indicator about dog foster. How many dog fosters do we have, and how many are big dogs? How many dogs per month are going into foster that are in this category? Looking at your adoption programming and really scrutinizing, is it meeting the needs of these dogs, or is it meeting the needs of the dogs that don't really need that extra help? Labeling, talked about breed labeling. You don't have to take away the breed labels. I worry about that from a data point of view, because if we take away all the breed labels, then how are we going to tell what's happening to the different types of dogs that are entering our shelter? I know the labels are problematic, but I also know no data or very vague data is really problematic also. Handling, we need to make sure people are handling them a lot, they're getting the care that they need, and then looking at if there's any obstacles. Are there any obstacles in your shelter that prevent a foster or an adopter from taking one of these dogs home? Then try to eliminate it. We just found out our matchmaker program has been sort of working, and we weren't doing those check-ins, and it's turned out with the volume of dogs and the volume of visitors, it can take up to 6 hours to visit. That's not going to work. That's a huge obstacle. So we've got to dial that back. We're working really hard on getting volunteers in there and creating a system that diverts the easy adopters away from the matchmakers so they're not even talking to those people. And just trying to think, like, what can you do, anything that you can do to break down those barriers and make it a little bit easier for them to get out. And so that's pretty much it. I think that it all boils down to 3 things, and the number of cages, including the enrichment and care they receive in those cages. But I'm hoping that next year we'll have more answers than we collectively will have more answers than we do now. That's it. Any questions?